Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Viviana, and for our hosts today. I do not deal with virtual reality, and my slides are not going to be as beautifully designed as the others. So I work with algorithms, specifically those algorithms that understand what we write. Well, you see, for some years now, with my colleagues, we have been working to develop and design software which on a social network can understand what we write and understand the emotion that we are conveying. So if we read something, are you an idiot? Well, my system will say, well, this is an aggressive, offensive, negative remark. In the second one, I'm so sorry, I will help you out. That's an empathetic message. And in the third one, what a great show. That's a tweet of joy and enthusiasm. As Viviana said, instead, we focus mainly on negative emotions. We all use social networks. We know that there's hate speech, that there's online attacks, misogyny, religious attacks, racial attacks. And so it's truly important to have tools at our disposal that can acknowledge when these messages are posted online. It is also interesting for social platforms because they want to be moderators and act very rapidly on hate speech. And the moderators on other platforms are people, are a pool of people, and people therefore do not act and react as swiftly. And so now they have been using automatic systems in social platforms. And in fact, you can see that often in social networks, you will see messages, automatic messages that say this is an offensive message. And sometimes it may occur that these messages are not offensive. So this is an extremely interesting environment. We are very interested in studying how cognitive information is validated. What is the information that we want to express? What is the emotion that changes from one language to another, and how these emotions are expressed in different cultures, in different countries. And so we're carrying out this extremely interesting research. Interesting because it has a social impact. Hate online is highly impactful, especially for youngsters and teenagers. It has many negative impacts, and even governments are asking for social platform to counter this. Even the European Union has asked to respond to alerts on social platforms within 24 hours. And so if social platforms has accepted this, is because there is a speedy system that can really immediately act upon these situations. So this is the core of my presentation. How do we acknowledge emotions by these moderation centers? So this is a state-of-the-art technology. We, like many other groups, work on these systems. These are AI systems. They use machine learning, and they are supervised. They learn from examples. I'm not convinced that these systems have a consciousness or have their own autonomy or independence, but they run via mimicry. And so if the system is aware of hate messages, more and more it will learn to mimic my decision when I have analyzed the data. So to make this system successful, we need to have a quite numerous number of annotated data. And These are data sets for training, and there are sort of a couple of thousands that are needed. The users are linguists, students, teenagers. In the past, we've worked with NGOs, task force that work to avoid hate speech, or they are collected via crowd sourcing platforms. And we do not really know who is monitoring these annotated data. So if training is supervised by us through machine learning. Now, the last model that has imposed itself is the language model. Well, this is a model that represents language. So, like people, when they learn a language and then when following instructions can carry out a task, well, this is done with the algorithms. I teach something to the system, and then I give a mathematical model to the machine by uploading thousands and thousands of documents. The larger the data set, the better, because the language can be better taught. So in Italian, for example, I will collect all of the information that I can collect in Italian, the web, Wikipedia, the more the better. And then I will come up with a model so that the algorithm, when I make a decision, will match data and the model. And this creates a background where my system knows the grammar of Italian, the terms, the most frequent associations between words, adjectives and nouns. So the system learns, not because I have given the Italian grammar rules, but because the algorithm has collected all of the, has received all of the data that I have uploaded. And so when I present tweets that are not in training system, it will be able to say this is a hate tweet and this can be shown. These systems work very, very well, especially with English, because we have a lot of training data on that, and so we get a 90% accuracy. Facebook, for example, informed us that they use a filtering system that are 93–94% accurate. And they also say that the few mistakes that are made, they can be examined. And in the last few years, once using artificial intelligence and deep learning, well, they're not transparent. The decisions that are made cannot be understood. Why did this system make this decision? So sometimes, to understand why the system has made a decision, I have to go backwards, understand from previous mistakes, and understand what the system analyzed once it made the decision. And this the system that makes these decisions on emotions, we have seen this emerge, is that the system has learned biases, and they use these biases when they have their decision making. And these biases can be a couple. The first source, for example, training data. The data I use to annotate to the system so as for it to learn. I do not need many of these, but they have to be clearly chosen and selected so that the system can really clearly understand and avoid the misconceptions. A very famous example in text analysis communities was on the first data set that was used to study misogyny online. There were many tweets online online that focused on football, on soccer, because soccer had been used to channel misogynist messages. And so when the system made decisions on soccer, they said, well, this is misogynist because the data set was misrepresented, and so the system had this misconception. And only by analyzing the data set, we were able to understood that the training data had to be collected in a more attentive and careful way. Another source of bias, and this is difficult to correct, is who is the data annotator. They have to make decisions on the tweet and decide whether that tweet channels and conveys a certain negative emotion. Of course, our experience, our philosophy, our moral entity will clash with somebody else's, and it's not easy to solve this via technology, but this, of course, impacts the way in which the system works. And so often we feed concepts that clash one with the other. For example, on the 8th of March, there were a number of messages posted by men where their intention was to compliment women or to channel, convey messages of love, of esteem, of affection, and the system instead understood these comments negatively, so very condescending, very patronizing, because they celebrated women as mums or wives. And on Twitter, therefore, with these categories annotating the data would be clashing. So we need to keep in mind that the profile of annotators has to be very, very clear. These people have to be very well trained so as to allow their best way of, being independent and not influenced by these things when chosen. Now, the training we've spoken about, and so the systems and the centers that create the data sets are shared with the scientific community. In Italy, we have 5 or 6 models. In English, we have more models. But given the fact that it's not that cost effective to create these models of calculus, the same model is used to carry out different tasks, answering, semantic extraction, emotion annotation. So we must be very, very carefully when creating language models, because if there's a bias in the language model, then it will impact all the tasks the system will be used for. We are becoming more and more aware in our community and the fact that we have to be very, very careful when studying language models, because there are some problems, you see. Wikipedia is one of the sources we use. It's free, it's available, it contains information that should not be subjective but objective, so verified and trustworthy. So it's one of the sources that we use, but we all know that even in Wikipedia there are female scientists are underrepresented, and this means that my model will learn that this domain is mainly male, and adjective will be used in the male manner. And this occurs for most of the terms. So dancing, ballet is a female aspect, childbearing, child education is female, soccer playing is a male domain. And all of these aspects are understood online, therefore And there are biases that are expressed, and the algorithm learns from us the bias. All of this with these sources feed into our systems.
Che appunto le piattaforme di social network ci propongono.
This is what social network platforms are offering us, and I think they are pretty effective in doing so. Now, we may have problems or different types of bias that pop up every time we need to make decisions or annotate new data. Sometimes the system is good and right in predicting, but almost always, for example, some messages containing bad words, well, they are considered offensive by algorithms. It is not always like this, okay? So the system, learns this kind of correlation having to do with hatred, okay? So almost always when they see a bad word, they think it's offending someone. Many offending messages also are linked to the identities of people, categories, religion, ethnic groups, sexual orientation. So these systems have a negative bias. If I talk about homosexuality in a tweet, the system, quite often may say that that title is offending someone, even if this is not true. If we align systems by taking data for quite a long time where things happen, the system sort of digests all of the judgments. We've carried out a study on tweets having to do with the US presidential campaigns and Trump. Many tweets offended Trump. Our system, trained with that data, now understands that when talking about Trump, it's always something offending someone. So you always have to consider that the domain changes, so the system has to be able to adapt. I have to constantly update data to update it, just like we do with human beings. Now, a major issue that we observed is the dialects, or let's say, sort of jargons of online community. Inside the community of people sharing something, they use a common language. Now, this is a way to feel closer to the rest of the team or to show empathy or that you are part of a group. But this is an issue for systems and algorithms that have to recognize emotions. This is a famous example. A study was made in the US. They saw that systems recognizing hatred online have a prejudice against the African Americans. Because, we understood why. Annotators who annotated data on American English were basically white with a bias, or maybe they didn't understand the African American slang, so when they saw those messages, they said, well, this is probably offensive. The system has interiorized or digested, if you will, the bias, and that it keeps reproducing it during the moderation phase. Now, the problem of communities and minority ethnic groups, this is a big issue, because in the future, moderation systems may be left independent, so they may be not followed by people. So it would be a pity, because we would, let's say, not give voice to minorities. If our systems are biased, well, this would definitely create a big problem. So social networks would, express the voice of the usual groups and usual communities which are already over-talking. Okay, this is it. But before doing this, I'd like to tell you that we don't have to avoid, artificial intelligence. We have bias. We are identifying them. We're trying to, combat against them. And there's parts of research I am involved with, which is the text analysis. Now we are deploying so many huge efforts to work on ethics and removing commonplaces and bias. I'm sure that many such problems will be solved in a few months or years. But the fact of finding bias and recognizing them, seeing them in algorithms, we can really, we help ourselves think of creating new algorithms. Okay, this is it. That's my final slide. Okay, then, thank you so much.